My name is Jada, and I learned the price of my parents' freedom early. It is a story I tell with bitter pride now, but back then, it was just a suffocating reality. My mom went to Europe for a month and left me with $20 when I was 11. When they finally came back, what my mom saw made her gasp, "No. No. This can't be happening." But that ending was weeks away. The beginning was just a hallway, a suitcase, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She moved through the foyer like a hurricane in a trench coat, checking her reflection in the gilded mirror. Her passport was tucked safely into her designer purse, an item that cost more than I would eat in a year. She didn't look at me, not really. She looked through me, focused on the taxi waiting in the driveway. The air smelled of her expensive vanilla perfume and new leather. I stood by the stairs, hands clasped behind my back, trying to take up as little space as possible. "You are such a big girl now, Jada," she said, finally turning to address the statue in her hallway. "Most kids your age still need a babysitter, but you are independent. You are capable." She said the words like they were awards she was pinning to my chest, rather than excuses for leaving me behind. I nodded because that was what I was supposed to do. I was the easy child. The one who didn't cause trouble. The one who didn't need to be watched. Or fed, apparently. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single, crisp $20 bill. It had that fresh ink smell, stiff and sharp against my palm when she pressed it there. "This is for anything small you might need," she explained, as if $20 could stretch across 30 days of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. "We stocked the pantry, so you are all set." I looked at the number 20 in the corner. It felt heavy, not like money, but like a test I was already destined to fail. Then came the backup plan, tossed carelessly onto the granite counter. A sleek, platinum emergency credit card. "That is for emergencies only," she warned, pointing a manicured finger at the plastic. "Do not go crazy ordering pizza every night. Be responsible." The card spun slightly before coming to a stop, catching the light from the chandelier. It looked like a lifeline, a shiny promise that I wouldn't starve. I didn't know yet that she hadn't activated it, or that I didn't have the PIN code to make it work. My father honked from the driveway, a sharp, impatient sound that made us both jump. "Gotta fly, sweetie?" she chirped, leaning in for a kiss that landed somewhere near my ear. She didn't hug me. A hug might wrinkle her coat. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and wheeled it toward the door, the wheels rumbling over the hardwood like thunder. "Be good. We will see you in a month." A month. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible, as she stepped out. The front door closed with a definitive, echoing click. I watched through the peephole as the taxi swallowed her luggage, and then her. They didn't look back at the house. They were already in Rome in their minds, sipping wine and forgetting they had a daughter. As the car pulled away, the house seemed to inhale. The silence that rushed in wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. It filled the corners of the foyer and crept up the stairs, reminding me that I was the only breathing thing left inside. I turned back to the empty hallway. The $20 bill still crinkled in my sweating hand. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the credit card on the counter. It seemed so small against the vastness of the empty marble. "Independent," I whispered to the refrigerator, testing the word. It tasted like metal. I had 30 days to survive on a crisp bill and a plastic lie. The sun was setting, casting long shadows, and I realized the lock on the front door was keeping me in. I waited exactly 1 hour before breaking the rules. My stomach wasn't growling, but the silence needed to be filled with the noise of a pizza delivery. I downloaded the app, scrolling through cheese valleys that looked like safety. I selected a large pie, typing in the numbers from the platinum card with trembling fingers. I hit place order and held my breath. A spinning wheel followed. Then, a red banner flashed across the screen. Payment declined. I tried again. Declined. The screen stared back, cold and unhelpful. I flipped the card over, searching for a typo. That was when I saw the small sticker I had ignored. Call to activate. My heart stuttered against my ribs. To activate the card, I needed the primary account holder's social security number, and a PIN I didn't have. I sat on the kitchen stool, the plastic digging into my palm. It wasn't a credit card. It was just a piece of plastic trash. My mom hadn't forgotten to activate it. She just didn't care enough to remember. I opened Mom's contact. She looked perfect in her profile picture. I typed, "Card isn't working. Need PIN." The message sent with a small whoosh. I waited, watching the 3 dots dance. Maybe she would call. Maybe she would apologize. Instead, a photo popped up. The Eiffel Tower, lit up like gold against a blue night. No text. No code. Just a digital postcard proving how far away she was. She hadn't read my words. She just saw my name and sent a souvenir. I put the phone face down so I wouldn't have to see Paris. The hunger was real now, a sharp pinch in my gut. I walked to the pantry, pulling the tall double doors open. Stocked, she had said. There was a box of gourmet crackers that tasted like cardboard, a jar of capers, and 3 cans of artichoke hearts. No bread. No peanut butter. No pasta. It looked like a museum of food, not a kitchen. It was ingredients for a fancy party I wasn't invited to. I grabbed a can of tomato soup. It felt heavy and good. I spun it around, looking for the pull tab. There wasn't one. I rummaged through the silverware drawer, pushing aside silver ladles and serving spoons. Where was the can opener? I checked the second drawer. The third. Nothing. My parents bought soup at restaurants. They didn't open cans. I stood there holding the metal cylinder. Trapped outside my own dinner. I slammed the can down on the counter, denting the aluminum. But it stayed sealed shut. I turned to the refrigerator, hoping the cold side held more promise. The light flickered on, illuminating vast, empty glass shelves. There was a bottle of white wine, a jar of expensive mustard, and a plastic container of takeout that looked 3 days old. I found a bag of apples. There were 5 of them. 5 apples to last 30 days. I took one out. It was cold and waxy. I held it like it was a grenade. If I ate this now, I would have 4 left. I couldn't just bite into it. That would be reckless. That would be what a child does. I placed it on the cutting board and found the sharpest knife in the block. I decided to make it a game. If I could slice it thin enough, maybe I could trick my stomach into thinking it was a feast. I shaved off a piece, so thin I could see the knife blade through the white flesh. I ate it slowly, letting the sugar dissolve on my tongue. It tasted like fear. I looked at the $20 bill on the counter. It was my only lifeline. If I walked to the corner store, I could buy maybe 3 sandwiches. Or 10 candy bars. But once it was gone, it was gone. I folded the bill into a tiny square, smaller than a stamp, and tucked it into my sock. It felt safer there than in the empty house. I wasn't going to spend it yet. I would save it for when the pain was unbearable. The sun went down, turning the kitchen into a cave. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the empty shelves again. I drank a glass of water to fill the hollow space in my stomach and climbed the stairs. The house groaned as it cooled, the wood creaking like heavy footsteps. I pulled my knees to my chest and closed my eyes. In Paris. It was morning. They were probably eating croissants. Here, the silence was so loud, I could hear my own heart slowing down. Day 4 began with a headache that felt like a tight metal band behind my eyes. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the silence that had become my only roommate. The television was off, because the noise felt too cheerful, for the gray light filtering through the blinds. I needed a plan that wasn't just slicing apples into paper. Thin ghosts. I needed to do something with the anger simmering beneath my hunger. I crawled toward my father's mahogany desk, searching for a pen, a weapon, or just something to mark the passing time. I found a leather-bound notebook tucked in the back of a drawer, a corporate gift my dad had never opened. The pages were cream, colored and smelled like expensive dust. I grabbed a black gel pen and opened to the first page. I didn't write, "Dear Diary," because that sounded like something a child would write, and I wasn't a child anymore. I wrote the word evidence in block letters at the top. The ink bled slightly into the paper, dark and permanent. This wasn't a story about my summer. It was a record. I carried the notebook to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the tile like a judge's gavel. I started my inventory, writing down every single thing that was missing. No bread, no milk, no cheese, no parents. I listed the expiration date on the yogurt in the fridge 3 weeks ago. I wrote down the date and time, circling the PM heavily. Writing it down changed the feeling in my chest. It transformed the gnawing emptiness into cold, hard facts. It wasn't just that I was hungry. It was that they had failed. A wave of dizziness hit me when I stood up, forcing me to grip the granite counter. My reflection in the microwave door looked warped and gray. I looked smaller than I had 4 days ago. Like I was slowly disappearing into the air conditioning. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the battery bar hovering at 50%. I didn't open the Messages app to beg for a PN code again. I opened the camera. If they weren't going to see me in real life, I would make sure they couldn't look away later. I hit the red record button and stared at my own pale face on the screen. Day 4. I whispered, my voice sounding scratchy and foreign. I have $5 left from the 20. Because I bought peanut butter at the gas station. It's almost gone. I panned the camera slowly around the kitchen, lingering on the empty fruit bowl and the dented can of soup I still couldn't open. I wanted the silence to be recorded. I wanted the empty echo to be trapped inside the phone forever. It felt like trapping a ghost. After saving the video, I opened my mom's social media page, bracing myself for the glare of her happiness. There was a new photo posted 12 minutes ago, a platter of oysters and 2 glasses of champagne. The caption read, "Living our best lives." I looked at the time on my phone and then at the time on her post. I wrote it down in the notebook. 6:14 p.m. Mom eating seafood. Jada eating nothing. The ink looked angry on the page. The contrast wasn't just unfair, it was evidence of a crime. A sudden spike of guilt pierced through my anger, sharp and familiar. Was I betraying them by writing this down? I imagined my mom finding the notebook, her face crumpling not in regret, but in disappointment. "You are so dramatic, Jada," she would say. I almost ripped the page out. I almost deleted the video. But then my stomach cramped, a physical reminder of who was actually the victim here. Loyalty was a luxury for people who had dinner. I smoothed the page down. I wasn't betraying them. I was just telling the truth. The room spun again, a carousel of beige walls and shadows. I sank to the floor, resting my cheek against the cool cabinet door. I needed water. But the faucet seemed miles away. This was the danger zone. The place where independent turned into negligent. I realized with a jolt that if I passed out here, nobody would know until the smell bothered the mailman. That thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me reach for the notebook again. I needed to write that down too. Dizzy spells started at sunset. I closed the book with a heavy thud and slid it under the refrigerator. Hidden from casual view. It wasn't just a diary anymore, it was a weapon waiting to be fired. I wasn't waiting for them to come home and hug me. I was waiting for the moment I could slide that book across a table and watch their smiles dissolve. The hunger was still there, sharp and biting, but it had company now. I had a purpose. I closed my eyes, listening to the house settle, waiting for the inevitable end. Day 7 started with a sound I had almost forgotten existed: a knock. It wasn't the rhythmic tapping of a delivery driver, but a persistent, heavy thudding that demanded an answer. I was curled on the sofa, clutching the leather notebook like a shield against the hunger cramps. My first instinct was to freeze. If I stayed quiet, whoever it was would go away, and I could go back to being a ghost in my own house. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, echoing through the empty foyer like a threat. I pulled myself up, the room tilting dangerously to the left. A voice called out from the other side of the oak door, muffled but distinct. "Jada? It is Mr. Vance from school. We need to do a wellness check." Mr. Vance. The guidance counselor who smelled like coffee and peppermint. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. Opening the door meant admitting defeat. It meant showing the world that I wasn't independent. But then my knees buckled, slamming into the wall, forcing the decision for me. I unlocked the door and cracked it open 3 inches, keeping the chain attached. The slice of sunlight hurt my eyes, blinding me for a second, before Mr. Vance came into focus. He was wearing his blue school blazer, looking out of place on my front porch. He looked down at me, his professional smile vanishing instantly. I knew what he saw: dirty hair, pale skin, and eyes that looked too big for my face. "Jada," he said softly, his voice dropping. "Can you undo the chain, please?" I fumbled with the metal slide, my fingers shaking so hard they wouldn't cooperate. Mr. Vance waited patiently, not pushing, just watching with a terrifying intensity. When the chain finally rattled free, he stepped inside immediately. He didn't ask for permission. He looked around the foyer, taking in the dust motes and the silence that felt heavy enough to touch. "Are your parents home?" he asked. though I could tell he already knew the answer. The house felt huge around us, exposing every secret I had tried to keep. They are in Europe. I whispered, the words scratching my dry throat. For the month. Mr. Vance stopped moving. He turned slowly to look at me, his eyebrows pulling together in a way that scared me more than shouting would have. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. Who is staying with you, Jada? I leaned against the wall to keep from sliding down it. Just me, I said. I have $20. The truth hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Mr. Vance didn't scold me. He didn't ask about my grades or my attendance. He swore softly under his breath, a word I had never heard a teacher use. Okay, Jada. I need you to sit down right now. He guided me to the living room chair, as if I were made of glass. He walked to the front door and opened it wide, waving to someone across the lawn. It was Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who usually only waved from her mailbox. She was running across the grass. Mrs. Gable burst into the hallway, wiping her hands on her floral apron. I knew it, she said, breathless and frantic. I told my husband something was wrong with the lights being off. She looked at me, and her face crumbled from curiosity into horror. She didn't ask questions. She went straight to the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile. I heard the refrigerator door open, and then close with a soft thud. There is nothing here, she called out, her voice rising in panic. Mr. Vance stood in the living room, typing furiously on his phone. I am contacting Child Protective Services, he said, not to me, but to the room. The words hit me harder than the hunger. Child Protective Services. That sounded like police cars. It sounded like trouble. My mom said I was independent. I mumbled, trying to defend a lie I no longer believed. Mrs. Gable came back with a glass of water and a granola bar she must have had in her pocket. Drink this slowly, Mrs. Gable ordered, her hand resting on my shoulder. It was warm and heavy, a feeling I hadn't realized I was starving for. I took a small sip, the water cool and shocking against my parched tongue. Mr. Vance sat on the coffee table in front of me, putting his phone away. You are not in trouble, Jada, he said, looking me in the eye. But your parents are. I looked at the notebook under the fridge. The secret was out, and it was loud. Mrs. Gable's kitchen smelled like garlic and roasted chicken, a scent so rich it made my jaw ache. It was a violent shift from the sterile silence of my own house. I sat at her scratched oak table, watching her move between the stove and the sink. She didn't move like a hurricane in a trench coat. She moved like a steady tide. You need to eat slowly, she warned, placing a bowl of broth in front of me. Your stomach isn't ready for a feast yet. I stared at the steam rising from the yellow liquid. It looked like magic, swirling in the ceramic bowl. Come here, she said, waving a wooden spoon. I want to show you how to peel a carrot. I stood up, my legs feeling steadier than they had in a week. She handed me a peeler, her hands warm over mine, guiding the motion. It wasn't like slicing my apple into transparent sheets to survive. This was preparation. This was abundance. We cook for tomorrow, not just today, she told me. The orange peels curled away, falling into the sink. I realized I was crying only when a tear hit the stainless steel. The broth tasted like salt and safety. I ate it one spoonful at a time, fighting the urge to tip the bowl back and drown in it. My stomach cramped, confused by the sudden arrival of actual nutrition. But I forced it down. I looked around Mrs. Gable's kitchen. Her pantry door was open, revealing bags of flour, jars of pasta, and boxes of tea. It wasn't a museum display. It was a promise that nobody in this house went to bed hungry. I felt a flash of anger so hot it burned. 2 days later, a woman named Miss Thorne sat at that same table. She wore a gray suit that looked stiff, and carried a tablet that looked too expensive for a kitchen table. "I am a case worker, Jada," she said, her voice low and even. "My job is to figure out the best way to keep you safe." She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like I was a colleague solving a difficult puzzle. "Mr. Vance told me about a notebook," she said, leaning in. "He said you called it evidence." I had brought the leather notebook with me, tucked inside my pillowcase. I slid it across the oak table, the cover cool under my fingertips. Miss Thorne opened it, her eyes scanning my handwriting. She read the inventory of the empty pantry. She read the timestamps of my mom's social media posts. She didn't gasp or sigh. She just nodded, a small, sharp movement. "And the phone?" she asked. I unlocked it and opened the gallery. Handing over the device felt like handing over a piece of my own skin. We watched the videos together in silence. The sound of my own voice whispering, "Day 4," filled the warm kitchen, turning the air cold. Miss Thorne watched the screen intently, her face unreadable, but I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped her pen. "You were very brave to document this," she said finally, locking the screen. "Most adults wouldn't have had the presence of mind." It wasn't a compliment, exactly. It was a validation. I hadn't been dramatic. I had been a witness to my own neglect. "Your parents land tomorrow at noon," Miss Thorne said, checking her calendar. The date was circled in red ink. My heart hammered against my ribs. "We have a decision to make, Jada. We can meet them here. Or we can meet them at your house." I thought about my empty foyer. I thought about the credit card gathering dust on the counter. If we met them here, they would feel like victims of a kidnapping. If we met them there, they would have to step back into the crime scene. Am I going to get in trouble? I asked, the old fear surfacing. For telling on them. I gripped the edge of the table, waiting for the lecture on family loyalty. Miss Thorne leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Jada, you didn't tell on them. You survived them. There is a very big difference." She made a note on her tablet. "We will meet them at your house. We will let them walk into exactly what they left behind." The plan settled in my chest, heavy and solid. That night, I packed my small bag to go back home. I folded the clothes Mrs. Gable had washed, which now smelled like lavender instead of fear. I put the notebook back in my pocket. I wasn't going back to wait for a hug or a souvenir. I was going back to watch the collision. I stood at the window, looking across the lawn at my dark, silent house. It looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. "I am ready," I whispered to the glass. And for the first time, I meant it. The house felt like a courtroom waiting for the judge's gavel. We sat in the living room, a strange tribunal arranged on the sofas. Miss Thorne sat in the center, her tablet resting on her knees like a shield. Mr. Vance stood by the fireplace, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Mrs. Gable sat next to me, her hand warm and heavy on my arm. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged. vibrating with the electricity of what was coming. I stared at the front door, counting the seconds until my life finally exploded. I adjusted the HDMI cable, connecting my phone to the large flat-screen television. The black mirror of the television reflected our distorted faces, waiting for a signal. My stomach churned, not from hunger this time, but from a nauseating mix of dread and adrenaline. I spent a month praying for them to come back. And now I was praying for the courage to face them. The air conditioner hummed, pushing cold air around the room, chilling the sweat on my neck. The stage was set, the props were ready, and the actors were late. Then came the sound that used to mean safety, the crunch of tires on gravel. The engine cut off, followed by the heavy thud of luxury car doors slamming shut. Muffled laughter floated through the window, a happy, carefree sound that felt violent in the quiet room. They were laughing. They were probably talking about the flight, or the wine, or the lack of traffic. Mrs. Gable squeezed my arm tighter, a silent command to breathe. I dug my fingernails into my palms. The key scratched against the lock, metal biting into metal. The door swung open, letting in a flood of humid afternoon heat and expensive perfume. My mother walked in first, dragging a massive suitcase that looked ready to burst. She was glowing, her skin bronzed from the European sun, her hair lighter and perfectly styled. My father followed, juggling duty, free bags and his phone, still chuckling at something she had said. They brought the energy of a vacation into a room that smelled like legal consequences. They didn't look at the living room immediately. They were too busy being the main characters of their own movie. "Honey, we are home," my mom announced, dropping her keys on the foyer table with a clatter. She spun around, expecting me to run into her arms. Instead, her eyes landed on the living room. Her smile faltered, twitching at the corners, before freezing completely. She saw the three adults sitting like statues. She saw me, standing slightly behind Mrs. Gable, looking older than she remembered. The duty-free bags in my dad's hands crinkled as his grip tightened. The silence stretched between us, elastic and thin, waiting to finally snap. "What is going on?" my mom asked, her voice pitching up into a nervous laugh. She took a half-step back, her eyes darting from face to face. Is everything okay? Is the house okay?" She didn't ask if I was okay. Her first concern was the structure, the property, the things she owned. She looked at Mrs. Gable, then at Mr. Vance, trying to piece together a social scenario that made sense. "Did we forget a meeting?" She tried again, her tan fading as the blood drained from her face. My dad, ever the optimist, decided to misread the room entirely. He spotted Mr. Vance and let out a relieved breath, assuming this was some neighborhood welcome committee. "Hey, Mr. Vance, right? From the school." He stepped forward, hand raised for a high five or a handshake, ignoring the tension thick enough to choke on. "Did Jada win an award? Is that why everyone is here?" His hand hung in the air, unaccepted. Mr. Vance just stared at him, his face hard as stone. My dad's smile slowly withered and died on his lips. Miss Thorne stood up, smoothing the front of her gray suit. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please sit down," she said, her voice commanding the space. It wasn't a request. It was an order. My parents exchanged a look, confusion mixing with sudden irritation. People like them weren't used to being told what to do in their own home. "Who are you?" my dad demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "And why are you in my living room?" He didn't sit. He puffed up, trying to look big. "I am with Child Protective Services," Miss Thorne said, dropping the title like a bomb. My mother gasped, a sharp intake of air that sounded like a hiccup. Her eyes snapped to me, wide and betraying a sudden, terrified panic. "Jada," she whispered. "What did you say? What did you tell them?" For a second, I felt the old urge to protect her, to lie and smooth it over. But then I felt the phantom weight of the empty credit card in my pocket. I stepped out from behind Mrs. Gable. I told them the truth. "The truth," my dad scoffed, finally dropping the heavy bags on the floor. "The truth is we left our mature, independent daughter for a few weeks with plenty of money and food." "This is ridiculous." He turned to Miss Thorne, pointing a finger. "You have no right to barge in here. We have done nothing wrong." He was rewriting history in real time, believing his own lie, because it was convenient. He looked at me with disappointment, as if I had failed a test. "I thought you could handle this, Jada. I thought you were grown." "She is 11. Mrs. Gable snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "She isn't an adult. She is a child you left to starve." My mom flinched as if she had been slapped. "Starve?" she shrieked. "There was food." The pantry was full. I didn't yell back. I just picked up the remote control. My hand was steady now. I pointed it at the television screen. "You didn't look at the pantry," I said quietly. "But I did." I pressed the play button. The black screen flickered to life, illuminating the room with a cold, digital light. The video from day 4 filled the screen. My face, gaunt and pale, stared back at us. The audio crackled, my whispered voice filling the room. "Day 4. I have $5 left. The peanut butter is almost gone." The camera panned to the empty fruit bowl and the dented can of soup I still couldn't open. The silence in the living room was absolute. My parents watched, paralyzed. They couldn't interrupt the video. They couldn't argue with the timestamp. They were forced to witness the slow, recorded decay of their daughter. My mom took a step toward the television, her hand covering her mouth. On the screen, I held up the platinum credit card and pointed to the activation sticker still on the back. The reality finally pierced her delusion. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tremble in my hands. She couldn't look away. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the ottoman, her expensive coat pooling around her. She looked from the screen to me, her eyes filling with horror. "No," she gasped, her voice breaking. "No. This can't be happening." Mom wiped her face, smearing mascara across her cheek like war paint. The shock of the video was fading, replaced by a defensive, brittle anger. She stood up, smoothing her trench coat, trying to regain the height she had lost. "Okay. So you were a little lonely," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "But recording it. Making a movie about it. That is manipulative, Jada." She looked at the caseworker with a practiced social smile. She has always had a wild imagination. She likes to play the victim. The words hit me in the chest, familiar and sharp. For a second, I felt the old instinct to apologize, to shrink down and agree that I was too much. But then I felt the weight of the notebook in my pocket. "I didn't imagine the hunger," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I didn't imagine the dizzy spells or the silence. Mom waved her hand dismissively. You are being dramatic. There were cans in the pantry. You just didn't want to eat them. You wanted takeout. Miss Thorne didn't let the gaslighting take root. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of paper, sliding it onto the coffee table. These are the receipts from when Mrs. Gable finally bought groceries, she said, her tone clinical. Notice the date. It was 7 days after you left. She pointed to a specific line. Before this, the only food waste found in your trash was apple cores and peanut butter wrappers. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. It was the sound of facts winning. She wasn't finished yet. Miss Thorne pulled out a second document, this one stamped with a medical seal. We had the school nurse evaluate Jada when she was discovered. She continued, looking directly at my father. She was dehydrated and showing signs of early malnutrition. Her blood sugar was dangerously low. My dad looked at the paper as if it were radioactive. He couldn't argue with biology. The independent narrative was crumbling under the weight of medical science. He loosened his tie, looking suddenly hot and trapped in his own living room. My father decided to change tactics, pivoting from denial to negotiation. He forced a smile that looked like a grimace. Look, maybe we miscalculated the supplies, he admitted, spreading his hands. We can fix this. Jada, how about we go to Disney next week? Just us. We will get the fast passes, stay at the resort you like. He reached for his wallet, a reflex to solve problems with plastic. We can buy you a new phone. Anything you want. We just need to put this misunderstanding behind us. This isn't a misunderstanding. Mr. Vance interrupted, his voice cutting through the bribery like a knife. This is child neglect. He stepped away from the fireplace, crossing his arms. You cannot buy your way out of a legal investigation with theme park tickets. My dad's hand froze halfway to his wallet. The word, legal, seemed to suck the air out of the room. He looked at Miss Thorne. Then at the police officer, who had just quietly stepped onto the porch outside. The reality of the situation was finally setting in. Mom saw that money wouldn't work, so she went for the heart. She turned to me, eyes swimming with fresh tears. Jada, baby, please, she begged, her voice dropping to a whisper. We did this for you. We wanted you to feel empowered. Don't let these strangers break up our family. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. They don't know us. They don't love you like we do. Tell them to leave. Tell them we can work this out. It was a heavy, suffocating guilt. I looked at her outstretched hand. A month ago, I would have grabbed it. I would have done anything to keep the peace. But now, looking at her manicured nails, all I could think about was the emergency card that didn't work. I thought about the 3 weeks of silence while she posted photos of oysters. They didn't love me, they loved the idea of me. They loved a daughter who was convenient and quiet. I wasn't that girl anymore. I had left her starving in the empty kitchen. Miss Thorne turned to me, blocking my mother's line of sight. Jada, she said softly. You have a choice today. You do not have to stay here if you don't feel safe. The room went dead silent. My dad held his breath. My mom looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. This was the moment. The power had shifted from them to me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air. I don't want to stay. I said. The words hung there final and absolute. I want to go back to Mrs. Gable's house, I added, making sure there was no confusion. My mother made a sound like she had been punched. She looked at Mrs. Gable with pure venom. She spat. You want to stay with the neighbor. She is practically a stranger. Mrs. Gable didn't flinch. She just stood up and put her hand on my shoulder. I am the stranger who fed her, Mrs. Gable said calmly. I am the stranger who showed up. That simple truth shut my mother up instantly. My mom lunged forward then, a desperate, jerky motion to grab me before I could leave. You are my daughter? She screamed, abandoning the calm act entirely. You belong here. I didn't let her touch me. I stepped back quickly, putting the solid gray wall of Miss Thorne between us. I flinched. Not because I thought she would hit me, but because her touch felt like a trap. That flinch said more than any testimony could. It showed exactly how deeply broken the trust really was. Miss Thorne held up a hand, stopping my mother in her tracks. That is enough, she ordered. Pack your things, Jada. I didn't need to pack. I still had my backpack on my shoulder. I hadn't put it down since I walked in. I looked around the living room one last time. The expensive furniture, the big television, the cold perfection of it all. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a stage set for a play that had finally been cancelled. I turned toward the door. I walked out into the sunlight without looking back. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing, a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the foyer. I heard my dad trying to argue with Mr. Vance, his voice rising in panic. But the sounds were fading. Mrs. Gable opened her front door for me, and the smell of roasting chicken wafted out to meet us. I stepped across the threshold of the neighbor's house, leaving my parents alone with their luggage and the heavy truth they could no longer ignore. 2 months later, the courtroom smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. It wasn't the high-stakes drama I had seen on television. It was quiet, filled with the shuffling of papers and low whispers. The judge didn't bang a gavel or yell. She simply signed a document that changed my entire world. Temporary custody is granted to Mrs. Gable, she said, her voice flat. My parents sat at the other table, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. They weren't the giants of my childhood anymore. They were just two people who had lost. My mother tried to catch my eye, but I looked at the seal on the wall. The judge ordered them to attend parenting classes and psychological evaluations. It felt strange to hear a stranger tell my parents they needed to learn how to be parents. My dad wrote something down on a notepad, his jaw tight. He was used to being the boss, the one who gave orders. Now, he was the one being graded. They had to earn the right to see me again. That shifted the ground beneath my feet permanently. Life at Mrs. Gable's house was different in every way that mattered. We didn't have silence, we had the radio playing softly in the kitchen. We didn't have empty shelves, we had a garden that demanded attention. I knelt in the dirt, the dark soil cool against my knees. Mrs. Gable handed me a tomato plant, its stem fuzzy and green. You have to bury the roots deep, she instructed. That is how they survive the storms. I packed the earth around the plant. I was finally learning how to grow something real. From the garden, I could see my old house across the fence. The windows were dark, staring back like hollow eyes. It didn't look scary anymore. It just looked empty. I saw a landscaping crew mowing the lawn, keeping up appearances for neighbors who now knew the truth. My parents were still there, living inside that museum of perfection. But without me to act as the prop, the house felt lifeless. I realized the house hadn't trapped me. I had just been waiting for permission to open the door. One afternoon, the mailman delivered an envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Perfect, loopy cursive that looked like calligraphy. It was from my mother. Mrs. Gable put it on the table without a word, letting the choice be mine. I stared at the envelope. I could imagine the words inside. She would talk about how much she missed me, how hard the classes were, how she was the victim. It would be a beautiful, well-written lie. I didn't feel the urge to tear it open. I picked up the letter, feeling the weight of the expensive paper stock. A few months ago, I would have read it 10 times, searching for a crumb of affection. Today, I simply opened the junk drawer and tucked it inside, unopened. I didn't need her words to define me anymore. I didn't need her apology to feel whole. The silence between us wasn't a punishment she was inflicting on me. It was a boundary I was setting for myself. I walked back to the kitchen, leaving her voice sealed away. Mrs. Gable was at the stove, stirring a pot of chili that smelled like cumin and comfort. "Wash your hands," she said without turning around. "Dinner is in 10 minutes. I went to the sink, watching the dirt from the garden swirl down the drain. I wasn't just a guest here anymore. I had chores. I had a bedtime. I had expectations. It turns out that real love isn't about freedom or leaving you alone. It is about checking in. It is about caring enough to make sure you eat." I thought about that $20 bill sometimes. The one that started it all. It was such a small price for my parents to put on my safety. But in a way, it bought me something priceless. It bought me the truth. It showed me who they really were, and who I could become. I wasn't the girl who starved in the dark anymore. I was the girl who walked out. I dried my hands and sat at the table. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged.